Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
It's The In Show, Australia's only show dedicated to innovation from Adelaide, Australia and across the globe.
Hi, this is David Grice and Troy Sincock. Once again, we're talking all about innovation, the people that put everything on the line because they had an extraordinary vision and decided to give it a go for the betterment of the rest of us.
Indeed, and the ideas that have come out are unbelievable.
It really has been extraordinary. We're 25 episodes deep now on The In Show, and we've spoken to all sorts of people from all kinds of backgrounds, but the one thing that really connects them all is their humanity, their desire to really contribute something to the furtherment of the rest of us.
And I love the way they really want to make a difference.
Yeah.
They want to change the way people behave and they want to change the way people do things.
Yeah, exactly. Talking about amazing things that have emerged, I went to the Electronic Music Conference in Sydney. I was speaking on a panel about the future of radio, and on that panel is a guy who is part of a virtual reality radio station. This is quite an extraordinary thing. It has connections to Sydney, Tokyo and New York City. And effectively the way the radio station runs is it's like a game. And so you go to Amsterdam and then you enter a nightclub, and then all of a sudden you have this experience where you get to control the music. And at the moment there's headsets, and they're trying to work out how it can really become mobile in the sense that radio is. But to think that this traditional medium that's always been available in our cars, and we know that autonomous vehicles aren't too far away, that the concept of radio could completely be reinvented.
And it's really interesting because I've got an 8-year-old boy, and one of the things he says about radio is you can't request a song.
Yeah.
And when you do, it's sort of like, a way down the track before you actually hear it back.
Yeah.
So something like this would be very cool.
Yeah, there's a whole cryptocurrency associated with it and a whole lot of big ideas. I get the impression that what I witnessed was just something at the ground floor of what we're going to see in years to come.
Speaking of ground floors, the very first day-night Ashes test has been in Adelaide this week.
Yeah, exactly. Now, they trialled it, with New Zealand, and Adelaide has really been at the forefront of, changing the way that we see cricket. The traditionalists would never have thought that cricket could be played in the evening if it was a test match. And now all of a sudden it's almost like a supply and demand thing. The 2020 cricket has become really popular and people have come out in droves and been supporting these teams that aren't necessarily, they're franchises, they're not state teams or national teams. It's almost just working with people's routines. It's like to put on cricket during a work day, it's really hard. People have got to take annual leave to get there. The idea of having it on in the evening so you can literally continue with your routine, finish work, and then go and enjoy the thing you're passionate about, probably spend $1 million doing it as well, over the bar and eating and all that kind of thing. It's a real testament to where the sport has come.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've got to tell you, I went and the atmosphere was unbelievable. Obviously, the traditional rivals of Australia and England battling it out on the field. And funnily enough, and I kind of don't get this yet, but at night time the ball seems to move a lot more and a lot differently to what it does during the day.
Yeah, it has a whole nother dynamic to test match cricket, really.
It really does, and so exciting to have been a part of that very, very first one.
Absolutely.
Now, Troy, on the show today, really excited about the two people we're talking to.
Yeah.
Melissa Cooper. Now, she's a user experience strategist, and she's back in Australia after a 6-year stint in San Francisco. And we're going to delve into the world of blockchain and talk to Frank Falco. Now, he's one of the founders of A Blockchain Factory. Now, they're the premier blockchain collaborative development shared workspace here in Adelaide, and he helps people and organisations develop business ideas and turn them into commercial reality by collaborating with the best available resources.
Yeah, can't wait to speak to Frank. Finally, we'll actually get to understand what blockchain is all about.
Can't wait.
Now, here's Claire with more in news, including a story about Yetis. Are they really real? What else have you got for us, Claire?
Thanks, David and Troy. This week I'll be talking about iron lungs and whether Yetis are real. But first, researchers have identified a possible solution that could save the Great Barrier Reef from the damage caused by bleaching and starfish. It's a new life support system that uses source reefs. A group of researchers from England, Queensland and the Australian Government Research Agency, CSIRO, found areas that could be used to produce larvae. They found over 100 source reefs that could be used to repair other parts of the reef by scattering fertilised eggs. The eggs that are produced in these reefs will be swept away by currents into other areas throughout the annual reproduction cycle to help the Great Barrier Reef repair itself. These individual reefs have been chosen because they're connected by currents to other reefs and they have a low chance of dying from bleaching. Changes to light, nutrients and temperatures cause coral to release symbiotic algae that bleaches it white. These reefs have also been chosen because they don't have many crown-of-thorns starfish, which are carnivorous coral-eating organisms. Although scientists say this won't safeguard the reef's future, it seems it is a step in the right direction. The maker community is rallying together to save a woman living in an iron lung. Martha Lillard has polio, which is an extremely infectious disease that attacks the nervous system and sometimes causes paralysis. The 69-year-old Oklahoma woman has been paralysed since she was 5. For over 6 decades, she's been relying on her 360-kilo iron lung to breathe. Martha spends half of each day laying inside her 50-year-old iron lung, which is a long cylinder that covers her entire body except her head, which pokes out at one end. On the opposite side, a mechanical lever tugs on leather bellows, generating enough negative pressure to force her to breathe. Iron lungs have been phased out since 2004, and experts estimate only about 6 people still use them in the US. But Martha can't use modern ventilators because they cause her serious health issues like inflammation and asthma. Now her iron lung needs spare parts which aren't manufactured anymore. So the maker community have come together to find a way to create the parts. They think they can use 3D printers, scanners and computers to reverse engineer the parts once they have access to design drawings. It's an incredible display of kindness which will hopefully save and prolong the lives of the last few remaining polio survivors. Have you ever wondered if Yetis are real? Well, researchers from the University at Buffalo in New York have found Yetis aren't real. A Yeti, otherwise known as the abominable snowman, is a large, hairy and tall animal that looks like an ape. The team conducted a DNA study of 9 supposed Yeti samples, including hair, skin and bone, but found that 8 were from bears native to the Himalayas and the other was from a dog. Charlotte Lindqvist, who was in charge of leading the genetic analysis, believes this is conclusive proof that the Yeti is just a type of black or brown bear. Until now, the true identity of the creature has evaded scientists who've been doubtful that the mythical beast even exists. According to folklore, it roams the snow-covered mountains in Tibet and Nepal. Despite this finding, Charlotte believes the legend of the Yeti will most likely live on, as it has become an important part of the culture of the Himalayan villages. And that's what's in news this week.
Thanks, Claire. Well, David, I am shattered about this because the abominable snowman, or the Yeti, I thought this, was going to live on forever. I almost don't like the fact that science has got involved in this and is trying to tell us that the Yeti doesn't exist. Like 8 were bears and 1 was a dog. I mean, there's got to be other samples out there. Is 9 samples enough?
Well, I tell you what, after a few red wines, you could think anything's anything, couldn't you?
Well, I've got to say, it does sort of paint the picture of, the person that is travelling in these areas, they're climbing up mountains, the oxygen's getting thin, they've been climbing for days, they see this sight and they're probably hallucinating at the time. They don't really know what's going on. They see this thing and their head creates it to be something that it's really not. It's kind of a bit disappointing, but actually most of them could be bears.
Yeah, look, it is. I really do agree with you. I think that mystery surrounding it's like the Loch Ness monster,
yes.
Really, isn't it? Is that real or is it not? We haven't got any scientific evidence, but I'm sure we're going to find some soon. But now the mystery of the Yeti is, but is the science right? That's the question.
Yeah, that's true. When you talk about the Loch Ness monster, I mean, what else could that be other than a massive sort of dinosaur that lives under the water?
Oh, I've got
I seriously don't know.
No, I don't either. And to be honest, that also begs the question around the Bermuda Triangle. Like, does that exist? And, do things disappear in that as well? Like, honestly, let's, I'd love to see some, exploration around that as well.
Okay, I think what we're saying is that there's still plenty of things unexplained and we're not entirely convinced that the Yeti doesn't exist.
Well, no. I don't think so.
It's David Grice and Troy Sincock. We're talking innovation on The In Show. You can check us out at theinshow.online Facebook and follow The In Show on Twitter as well. Coming up, we're going to speak to user experience strategist Melissa Cooper, who's specialising in helping organisations develop strategic product decision-making on The In Show.
It's all about innovation. The In Show.
Adelaide is starting to be recognised as a smart city, nationally and globally. The City of Churches is rapidly gaining a reputation as the city for innovation. Smart city innovation is becoming a big part of our future. The Adelaide Smart City Studio is supporting people that are creating new smart city products and services for global markets. What we've taken for granted is now being embraced by residents and visitors alike. Adelaide Smart City Studio, creating opportunities.
Hi, I'm Craig Swan from Loop Labs, and you're with Troy and David on The In Show.
It's David Grice and Troy Sincock, and if you've missed an episode, make sure you subscribe to the In Show podcast on iTunes and rate us 5 stars if you enjoy what you're hearing.
The In Show.
We're joined by Melissa Cooper, a UX or user experience strategist with 15 years experience. She's done it all from designing user experiences for large online publishers, including Fairfax Digital, ABC's Innovation Unit, news.com.au. And after work with Eventbrite, she's now back in Australia following a 6-year stint in San Francisco. So what was the highlight of the last 6 years, Melissa?
Oh, I don't know if you could pick one thing out. I think when I went over quite bright-eyed and a bit naive, really, as I'm sure you can imagine, it was around I interviewed at the end of 2010 and arrived there in February of 2011, and it was kind of, there were obviously really big things happening in the kind of second wave at that point, but it was really just probably the beginnings in what we're seeing out there today. So it was great to be on that curve and to arrive in the valley. And for me, particularly, it's something that I wanted to do because it was like an adventure, but also just my passion for digital businesses and technology and user experience, and sort of go and kind of put myself in the mecca of what that is for people who really enjoy doing those things as I do. So I think that what I really love about user experience, which is definitely the highlight of being there, is just that you're always tackling new problems. Technology is always evolving really, really quickly and rapidly. And so, most of the time, none of us kind of entirely know what we're doing, but we've got a lot of experience to leverage off to make some really good decisions and just keep a good close eye on everything and iterate from there. So for me, definitely a highlight is big learning curves, but that's sort of very much about why I'm into user experience and working on technology businesses as well. So, yeah, it was a very accelerated period, I'd say, for that reason, because it is a very busy, happening environment to be in for those things.
Can you explain to us what is a user experience? Because a lot of our listeners probably don't understand the term UX, and those that are involved in technology do. But perhaps could you just let us know what is involved in what the user experience is all about?
Yeah, I have a couple of different answers for this one, depending on who I'm talking to. In a way, I think that, if from the answer for my grandma is I make blueprints for websites, but that's very, very simplistic version. So think of user experience as a design discipline, but more like solution design rather than brand or visual elements. Typically, a process for me would look like we've got a goal or a problem or a challenge. I'll do a bit of research around that. I'll go out and find out about how the people who are going to use the product think about what it is that we're trying to achieve, and then actually come up with a workflow or a solution that meets those user needs. And so I think really at the centre of it is that user-centred objective in terms of a way of inventing what a feature or a product is going to look like and feel like. And so ultimately the user experience is what a person encounters, experiences, thinks, feels, questions when they come to an interface to use it.
And can I ask about the research that you do in that area? Because, is it enough for you to just jump on the platform yourself and, kind of run through from A to Z and go, it was a bit tough? Or, how much scrutiny do you give that? And, how many people do you talk to, and what makes you go, okay, I got it, this is how I can improve things?
In terms of saying before, there's a vast variety of experiences, and so there's always prior learnings and knowledge that you can lend to things. And also quite often there are clear usability issues. I think when it comes to the way somebody expects a pull menu to work or something like that, that those standards are really well established now. 15 years ago at the beginning beginning of my career, they probably weren't, and we did spend more time finicking over the details. But really, so there's a lot we can do when looking at something from a fresh perspective, as you know, like an expert review or whatnot. But the benefit of actually sitting next to a customer and is looking at it through their eyes, and so particularly when you've been designing an interface, it's kind of like it's that you can kind of regain the fresh eyes perspective. So when you're designing, you get really close and you get nutty into the details, and as soon as you put it next to someone else and just kind of keep quiet and ask, and just sort of say, what's your first impression and what are you thinking, what do you want to do, then you get a really new insight into what it is that you've been creating, and you can do that really, really quickly. And so from a numbers perspective, that's interesting because that question comes up a lot. Nielsen Norman Group, which are sort of 4 founders in the field, did some studies and identified that basically after you've spoken to 5 people, like in a user testing scenario, you sort of have diminishing returns. So, and I find in my experience when it's user testing that, you sit down with one person and you'll be like, oh, wow. And then you'll sit down with 2 people and you'll be like, wow, that's different. And then the third person will start to confirm things, and by the time you get to the 5th person, you've sort of got your patterns. You're starting to hear things over and over again. And I think it's kind of when you sort of have those like aha moments through that you can keep moving forward. So the idea is to test more frequently. And so, and maybe then again with different user types as well. So you could do, if we refer to Eventbrite, we've got sort of the buyer and the seller side of the market. So I could be building a feature that affects both customer bases, and I might decide that I'm going to start with the event organisers first and run my concept by them, update it, and then take it to the attendees, and kind of continue from there. So it's sort of an iterative process in that way as well.
Gotcha.
So speaking of Eventbrite, how on earth did you get involved?
Yeah, I was in Sydney working for News at the time, and I'd been in Sydney in the media doing UX for Fairfax ABC News. I'm kind of really into how news is created at the time, and I sort of was starting to feel a bit like a change, and I kind of had this moment where I was like, oh, why not maybe just go to Mecca. And so I decided that what I would do first was go for a holiday. And so I went for a holiday, and Eventbrite was one of the brands at the time that I knew because I'd been to plenty of tech events in Sydney, via the platform. And I got out there and I was fortunate enough to interview. Went through 3 rigorous rounds and met a bunch of people in the organisation and the founders. And at that time, they were actually pretty surprised that this Australian from, the other side of the world had even heard of them. And I was like, what are you talking about? Everyone uses Eventbrite in Australia. And it wasn't long after that we sort of started with a global strategy. And as it turns out, Australia was one of the fastest growing places organically when they looked into it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I mean, what was your perception of, being in amongst Silicon Valley and all that sort of represents versus the actual reality of it? Did the two things match up?
People in the Valley and we're just like, have you seen that HBO show Silicon Valley? It is frighteningly accurate. Right. It is insanely on point. But at this, and great use of humour. But at the same time, when you're there, you do have access to go and see some of the world leaders speak at Yelp for free or whatever. And you do that from time to time, but you're just so busy, really, really heads down in that startup culture. It's like one of the things that I really loved about it that was very immediate to me is that the entire team or the entire company is encouraged to treat the business as if it's their own. So it's not like, oh, these are your tasks and you need to go ahead and do this or that. It's like, here's the stats. This is your objective. What are you going to do? And so, you just really knuckle down and get obsessed with what it is that you're working on. And so I think probably one of the things that I expected was probably to get around and meet different people in different companies and listen to, be part of all of that thing external from the company. And it's probably, it did some of that, but I think looking back, I wish I did more. But then at the same time, I was just doing so much growing in this team and learning from these people that I was sitting right next to at the time. Yeah.
So how did you actually get started? Was it this kind of design something that interested you way back, or is it something that you grew into? And sort of explain to us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, it's something that I grew into, and I think that anybody who's been at it for 10, 15 or even 20 years is probably like, I started doing this thing and we didn't know what it was called. Like there really wasn't sort of a discipline for that back then. My own story was that I sort of was interested in filmmaking and made films, and so I studied that, and I took minors in digital media and made some CD-ROMs, which is always
those
fun
were the
days. You're a member director. And yeah, so I think it was like first year uni when actually like HTML was a new subject that you could do, and it seemed kind of really hard, which is kind of hilarious now. But for me, I think I kind of shifted from film to digital media because it's something that I could always be doing. Film's something you do a lot of thinking and planning, and it just kind of suited my temperament more as an individual. But I think in the software industry and in the tech business industry, it sort of evolved out of people struggling with building things that nobody wanted or that didn't fit the purpose, and then having to go back and rebuild and the costs associated with that. So I think one of the main benefits of user experience where, sometimes if you're not familiar with the methodology, it might feel like, oh, well, we've got to do a couple of weeks worth of work up front before we even get started, and it's not true like at all, but it will save you time down the track. The reassurance amongst the team and the confirmation that you're actually building something that people want, you're often able to figure out that this thing that would have cost a lot of engineering time doesn't actually add a lot of value, that sort of thing. And so it kind of really came out of that need. I was a bit of a jack of all trades in my early days, and I just grew more and more attracted to that side of things. And then that's when I went over to Sydney and did my master's and majored in interaction design.
And what had you come back?
Yeah, I came back because it was time to return to Australia for me, really, I think. And having lived in Sydney for 8 or 9 years, but then been gone for 5, I wasn't necessarily sure where to land. So it made sense to come back and be with the family for a while and check out this place again. It's actually, it'd been 15 years since I lived in Adelaide, and I'm really loving being back. It's sort of a lot's changed, and last time I lived here, I didn't really have any money. Now I actually can go to a wine bar. So I do different things here than I used to, but it still has that really a homely, easygoing feel about it. Yeah.
So obviously the user experience, I'm just back there in my thinking at the moment, and this is something that really is only kind of been something that I've started thinking about in recent years, and it's one of those things that sort of is an outpouring of where technology's actually taken us, isn't it? Because gone are the days where, in the traditional websites you'd be clicking here, clicking there, clicking there, clicking there, and then getting the information. It's all about a 1 or 2 click now, isn't it? Yeah, well, I think it used to be about putting up with what you could get, and that's, I think, one of the interesting things about where design's at currently. We're really at a tipping point because it's really clear that as technology's easier to build, and faster to build, the competitive edge really is in the experience. And so there's a lot of people talking about that at the moment, and there's a lot of awareness that's being felt in the upper tiers of companies that previously might have thought design was this kind of fudgy, smudgy kind of thing that was very subjective and whatnot. So, yeah, I think that customers have more choice than ever before, and with that choice comes do I like this? And then do I love this? And am I going to come back to this? And so those are the challenges that companies are facing now, because if you don't have customers, you don't have a business.
I can really relate to it, having worked in radio for 25 years or so, and you just know, from a listener's point of view, you don't have to do too much wrong to have them go, don't like this song, I'm going to tune into another radio station, find another song I like right now, and then you could potentially lose them forever based on whatever experience the other radio station's offering. It seems that, as David said, one extra click of the mouse and you could be out of there, going to another like-minded product, given that the market is full of so many similar things. Can you paint the picture of what is an excellent user experience? Is there some key ingredients you're trying to achieve whenever you tackle these problems?
there's so much involved, really, because, you know, you can make the best product in the world and nobody can find it, so you failed. One of the things that was sort of interesting challenge about Eventbrite is that you sort of, for most people, they think about it as an events platform and their experience in life is as an attendee. And so how does it work in terms of finding an event and getting a ticket and going to the door and scanning that ticket? But really the experience challenge of that business to be successful is also the at-the-door experience. Like, events fail if you can't get 50,000 people through into a festival in a reasonable time frame. And then certainly up on the front end, the event organisers, some of those are doing free networking events, some are running 50,000 people festivals, and that's their business. And reporting's really important, and if you can't deliver against those business objectives, then they're not going to return to you or use you. So at the end of the day, in my experience, there's always way too many ideas than you can tackle. And so one of the hardest parts is really prioritising and iterating and just using your best judgment, because you're going to know heaps more than you did 6 months ago in 6 months' time as well. And technology is going to evolve as well. So it is a real balancing act.
And is what you do, does it continue to evolve? Like, so once you've just delivered the first for the launch of the website or the product, do you then come back again in a month or 2 months, revisit, then rework, then change again? Is it something like that continues to evolve over time, or is it sort of once you've done it, that's...
You're never done. Yeah, it's definitely, once you're putting your best foot forward throughout the whole process and getting validation throughout. But certainly once you launch, you need to watch those numbers. And based on those numbers, you could learn that you're having some great successes and that provides inspiring ideas to double down on. Or you could learn that something just, wasn't quite what you thought it would be, and you need to kind of figure out why and fix it. And then based on that, you sort of have to weigh that against the things that you were planning on doing next. So is this next thing going to be more important than double downing on the success you've just had, or, how are you going to play that out? And I think that's where it gets a bit tricky, because, again, there's just so much that, when you're really sort of neck deep into a product and you know your customers really well, you've got lots of ideas. And so what's really going to shift the business?
And what sort of numbers are you looking at when you talked about the numbers there?
Yeah, certainly looking at sales, user growth, web analytics. I always try and keep A/B testing running as well.
What do you mean by that, A/B testing?
A/B test is where you serve a different experience to the control. So that you've got your variant A and your variant B. So usually there could be optimization tweaks. And if you're making that in the cart, you can only really run one at a time. But that's where what you're looking for is making a small tweak that might shift the conversion by 1%, and 1% in e-commerce is huge, right? So you just want to always keep one of those going, so you're experimenting and learning. Yeah.
What we love about people we've spoken to on this show about innovation is people's willingness to share failures, epic failures. Has it been? Do you have a story that comes to mind where you just couldn't make something work?
I have to give me a sec. I'm sure there's something.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I think one of the things that I think is really interesting is because failure is sort of a trendy thing in the industry, but I think that while it's a bit of a catch cry or a phrase that draws people to it, what it's really about is experimenting and innovating. So I think, have we released things that didn't go as planned? Sure, of course. But again, back to the previous points, you're sort of always watching what's happening, and, small changes can make a big impact. So I don't really walk away from those experiences feeling like, oh, God, that was an epic failure. But more so, we now know how to make that better. We've learnt. And so I think that when you talk about failure and people talk about, like, if you're not failing, you're not doing it, you're not take enough risk. They're talking really about learning, I believe. Yeah.
Well, Melissa, thanks so much. It's been great having the opportunity to speak to you on the in-show UX or user experience strategist, Melissa Cooper. Thanks.
Thank you. It's been great. Thanks for having me.
It's David Grice and Troy Sincock on The In Show. Subscribe to iTunes and listen to The In Show podcast for more innovations. Up next, Frank Falco tells us more about a blockchain factory. It's a place for people and businesses wanting to learn the why and what of blockchain for business, as well as an environment for the development and commercialising of blockchain applications and applying the use of blockchain to business. More next.
Download the Phoner app before you head to your next event. Find people easier, market yourself better, and get connected using Phoner. That's spelled P-F-O-N-R. Phoner. Available in the App Store now.
Hi, I'm Kirk Drage from Leapship, and you're with Troy and David on The In Show.
The In Show.
Now, David, I think finally, we've touched on this many times over the last 25 episodes, but I really feel that blockchain is going to be revealed for us both to fully understand today.
I really can't wait because I have so many questions around it and what it can do and what industries it can be used in. I've got some burning questions of my own that I want to ask Frank.
Well, yeah, Frank Falco, who's one of the founders of a blockchain factory. They're the premier blockchain collaborative development shared workspace in Adelaide, and it's a place for people and businesses wanting to learn the why and what of blockchain. So, blockchain, explain simply, what is it, Frank?
Well, simply, blockchain's a distributed technology, and in its essence, it's basically a database, and it's the thing that underpins Bitcoin that everybody's very excited about at the moment. It's going through the roof. Whether that's a good thing or not remains to be seen. But in its simplest form, it's a database, and the real power of it is it's distributed and public and immutable, so it can't be changed. Mm-hmm. And so that gives us some real opportunities to apply that technology in new ways across business problems and bring new solutions to the market. So it's exciting stuff. That's the simplest way of describing it. We can talk about a lot of technical detail about it, but simply that's what it is. And so the Bitcoin blockchain is the sort of simplest form of that. It's a value pair. It stores value and it transfers it from one address to another. Mm-hmm. People call them wallets, but it's actually a key. And so that's the simple thing. And what's great about it is it's distributed across a network on multiple computers, so it's not controlled by any individual, any corporation or any government. Mm-hmm. Can't be disrupted. And every transaction is validated in a very secure way. And once that transaction's been validated, it cannot be changed. And so the entire history of all blockchain transactions are available, and anyone can download it. I have a copy of it sitting on a machine at home. I don't do much with it, but it's sort of cool to sit there and go, I've got every blockchain transaction that's ever happened. Mm-hmm. And anyone can do that. And that's an incredibly powerful thing, that those transactions are publicly available, which is unheard of. In any bank, you don't get to see every transaction like you can on the blockchain network. And so that opens up some real interesting opportunities about how do you apply that to business problems. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the exciting thing about it.
Yeah. So where are you seeing it being applied at the moment?
Oh, it's being applied in all sorts of areas, and sometimes not necessarily because it needs to be, but because it's a way of changing the business model. So we're seeing it across, there's projects at the moment across energy, across obviously financial remittance, value chains, across logistics systems, things like wineries, the winery value chain. There's people applying blockchain in a lot of business problems and a lot of opportunities to change the way the model works or improve the model and improve the efficiency of the model. One of the really powerful things about it is this concept of a smart contract, which lets you programmatically define almost any sort of business interaction you want, and then you can start applying that in a really interesting way. So when you start thinking about using that technology with other technology, for example, IoT devices, which are anything that's network connectable, so things like weigh bridges, those sorts of things, you can start sitting there making these things intelligent, smart meters in electricity grids, solar panels, those sorts of things. When you start making those things intelligent and then start applying a blockchain type smart contract technology, you can start doing some really powerful things. An example I often use because it's really relevant is driverless vehicles, automated cars. They're not far away. In fact, in the next few years they'll be available. And so the whole concept of how you interact with a car or even own a car is going to fundamentally change. So if you think about a scenario where, right now you either own a car or you might use an Uber or a taxi, not too far away you'll be in a situation where there'll be these autonomous vehicles around the place and they'll just arrive when you need them, or they'll just be there. And the whole concept of parking your car changes, like where a car park's going to be. They're not going to be in the middle of the city because you don't need to walk to them. The cars will go and park themselves. And then you'll call them and say, I want to interact with that car. And you might take it for a short ride, or you might take it for a day or a week or whatever. So if you take that idea and then apply blockchain technology to it and smart contracts, you'll be able to have a situation where I could walk up to a car, an autonomous car, and it will interact with me via my phone, and it will know who I am, how old I am, what my driving history is, where I am now, where I'm going to, and then it will be able to create, in effect, a contract about how I interact with that car, right down to how much is it going to cost me to drive that car, create an insurance policy based on my particular driving history or my particular interaction with that car for that location to that destination on that day. It can take into account things like, is it going to rain today? Is it, what's the road conditions going to be? And it will be able to customise that whole transaction, the insurance policy for that period of time, and it's never been able to be done before. And you'll be done almost instantly. And so by the time you've got to the car, opened it, got in and started driving it, all that's happened. And you don't even worry. Just like you do with an Uber now, you walk in, hop in the car, get out and you walk out. You don't sit there and tap a card. It just does it. Well, this is sort of like the next extension of that. And so when you start applying that sort of technology to other things like energy or health or lands title. In Australia, we don't really worry about, the concept of corrupting our lands title system. We sort of trust the government, whether we should or we shouldn't. Is a whole different debate. But in some countries, that's a real problem. You can't trust the government, and they, they turn around and say, that I just gave that block of land that you think is yours. It's not yours anymore. I gave it to my cousin Fred, right? And you want to do something about that? What are you going to do, right? The concept of a blockchain for land title becomes a publicly immutable ledger that nobody can tamper with, including the government. And that's a great thing because, that's a major asset for people. At the moment, we have to sit back and say, well, let's hope that whichever government is control of our lands title, which in our case is the South Australian government, that's a great thing. Well, here's an interesting thing. They just sold it.
That's right.
So what does that mean?
Maybe are we saying that there won't be any need for a lands titles office in the future?
Don't know. My point is if all titles are put on a blockchain and those transactions are recorded at the time, there's no issue about who owns it because it's publicly and no one can tamper with it. You can sit back and point at that record at any point in time and say, that was the record, I'm the owner, until somebody creates a new record that says I'm not the owner anymore. Extend that out and say, okay, so if you have that on a blockchain, how can we change the way we handle property transactions to the way we do them now? The concept of conveyancing and bank, again, smart contracts become a whole new way of doing business and will compress time and cost dramatically. So the concept of a 30-day settlement, we could do it in an hour, especially if you've got the money sorted out and the banks are connected to it, or maybe you're using cryptocurrency, in the future or now. I mean, there's some people sitting on enough cryptocurrency to buy some serious property. When you start thinking about business models and how do you, I don't want to say disrupt it, but how do you improve it? Because in my opinion, you should apply technology to improve stuff, not for the sake of just using it, because it's the cool thing to do at the moment. And there's a lot of that going on at the moment. And it always happens when new technology comes out. People go, oh, we've got to, we're going to do everything in that. And you say, well, maybe you can, but should you? Is it actually adding value? Is it actually improving it? Are you going to get participation of the stakeholders? Is it going to materially improve the lot of all the people participating in that transaction? Is that a good thing? So you're seeing a lot of rampant speculation on currency, on ICOs, on how people are coming up with these ideas and saying we need to fund them, and it's nothing more than an idea on a piece of paper with no idea of how to actually execute it, but people are throwing money at it. Not necessarily a good thing for the industry, but these are the things that happen and it will flesh itself out. The underlying technology of blockchain is an absolutely world-changing thing if it's applied properly and constructively. And I think that's the real opportunity to give some real benefit to a whole bunch of industries and put the power and the transparency, more importantly, into a lot of transactions that we don't have that now, and we really should.
One of the things with blockchain that's still muddy in my mind is the fact that blockchain is actually not something we see. It's the thing that's underlying what we see. So I liken it to what the internet is. Like we see an interface, which is Google, we play with it and we respond and do whatever we have to do. But underneath all of that is a layer of massive complexity, and that's actually what blockchain is.
Well, yeah, and I suppose the analogy to the internet is a good one. I mean, I'm old enough to actually have been around when we put it in and we started using it. So the analogy is the same. And I used to be the CIO of Internode. And so you want to talk about layers of complexity, try running an ISP. So the point is that there are complexities there, but to a certain degree, it's a utility just like anything else. And do you actually know how Google works, or do you care? No. You throw a search at it and you trust, you sit there and go, I get some search results and I'm happy with that, and it works really well, or Bing or whatever other search engine you want to use.
So when customers first have a conversation with you about blockchain, Frank, what are they looking to do? Is there a particular problem they're looking to solve, or do you find they're just wanting to know more so they feel like they're taking a step into the future and they're there when this becomes a regular thing?
A bit of both.
Yep.
Some people come to us and just say, what's blockchain? I don't even know what it is. And I try to keep it as simple as possible. And then they usually go, I heard about this Bitcoin thing and it's going crazy. What should I buy? And I usually say, I'm not a financial advisor, and if you want to spend your money, do the research and work it out yourself. Because you should if you're going to spend your money, at least educate yourself a bit. And then there's people trying to solve problems or trying to come up with a business solution. I mean, just before this, I had a meeting with somebody about a project he wants to do, and he laid out for me what roughly the project is. And his only question to me really was, can you technically implement that? And I went, I technically can. From a technology point of view, we can implement it, but you don't have enough information about what the business model is, what the processes are. And so we talk through what he needs to do to get that together, and we'll work together on that, and we've agreed to do it over the next month. And
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Frank Falco from A Blockchain Factory. Thanks for joining us on The In Show.
Thanks very much for having me.
It's all about innovation on The In Show. And if you know an innovator that we should have on the show, drop us a line at theinshow.online. You can check us out on Facebook and Twitter as well.
Next week on The In Show.
We chat to Tanya de Jong, a spiritual journeywoman, a creative innovation catalyst and social entrepreneur. Now, you caught up with her last week in Melbourne, Troy.
I did. She's an extraordinary woman. I went to a conference and she was the keynote, and I realised in that moment that she wasn't just a soprano, but an incredible innovator. She's founded numerous charities, including the Song Room and Creativity Australia's With One Voice. That's a community project that really is, bringing people together from all sorts of backgrounds right around Australia.
And she's also done a TEDx talk.
Yeah, she certainly has. It's called How Singing Together Changes the Brain. That sparked all kinds of global interest and shows that she's not just a singer. This woman has got some extraordinary things going on, so we'll speak to her.
And we all know the power of music on the brain and the cognitive, aspects of what goes on and what music can actually do to somebody when they're suffering. We talked about Alzheimer's and all those other diseases. That music's playing a massive part in curing.
Yeah, it's going to be a great chat. Claire's going to have more mind-boggling innovations from around the world. And of course, you can check us out at theinshow.online and subscribe to iTunes. Rate us 5 stars while you're there if you like.
Well, it's been another great show again this week. I just love what we're uncovering with the In Show, and I just can't wait to find out what Tanya's got to share with us next week. Now, before we go, here's Emma Hack talking about how being open to change can create a world of opportunities.
I think the way that we created back in the day and the way we create now are two very, very different things. So back in the day, I think people were very solitary, and that's the way that we did it, But I think now business is a lot more open, and it's, like when you go into businesses and everybody's sort of working together, and it's all very open environment. People are able to talk to each other about what they're doing. There's no closed off, rooms and things like that. So you can only be just as strong being one person. But if you've got 100 people behind you and everybody is thinking in a similar way, or in a way that, they want to help other people or be a part of something. And I think when it comes to creating a work environment, people are really desiring more. And I think if you're smart in business, you'll be buoyant. I sort of see it like dodging and weaving a little bit. And I think if you don't change often anyway, you'll get lost and left behind. So be innovative in the way that you can open to change, open to letting other people in. Like one of the things I really noticed when I was overseas, and that was never done here, was that, I'd be somewhere and talking about what I did, and people were like, oh wow, that's amazing. I can introduce you to so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And I think the real big problem with Australia back then was no one did that. But I think we held everything because you're fighting for things here as well so much. So yeah, but I think Australia is now changing. And because we're open to dealing with people all around the world now, and the innovative way of sort of, creating and involving community and sort of creating this sort of space where people add ideas and not feel incredibly judged and all that kind of stuff is really important.
The In Show, brought to you by Adelaide Smart City Studio. Subscribe to the In Show podcast on iTunes. Presented by David Grice and Troy Simcock. News by Shannon Corvo and Claire Murphy. Music by Zach Grice. Produced by Jason Walker. A Dave and the Beanstalk production.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.